Hey, brother, you guys are live.
So quick question. So are we streaming on a BB2Me as well? Because I have a slide where I thank them because I thought like they were going to be part of it too. No?
No, we're streaming strictly on YouTube at this point. But I'm gonna mute. I'm gonna let Shanuti get started. Y'all hear the kids in the background over here, so let me get a few things done.
Okay.
All right.
You can let me know.
Yeah.
Now I gotta delete this real quick.
Mm-hmm. Well, do what you gotta do. So, tap everybody. I hope you all doing well. Welcome to this general meeting of AI Philly on Zoom. I hope you all doing well. Really, I know it's tough time. I hope that you keep your morale high in this difficult time. Hopefully today, with what we have to present, you will learn a lot, and you'll be able to at least to think about something different than what's going on outside. At least that's the case for me. Um, Today, presentation is gonna be done by brother Zach, and the title is African Civilization, Afrocentricity, and Entertainment. Right. So this is gonna be really good. But before, as it is for us tradition here in AI, we're gonna do our daily prayer, and maybe also if Sister Dr. Ya Elombe, she wanna do she did the last time a good libation. Um, she's fine with it. She can do a libation, and if not, we can just proceed. Sister Elombe, do you want to do you want to do a libation? Are you comfortable, or want to call you on the spot? I know you weren't prepared for that.
No, you go ahead.
All
Yeah.
right. So just want to make sure. So I want to make sure I have your blessing. I don't want to step over your toe. You're elder, and I have a lot of respect for you. So thank you a lot. So I'm gonna do I'm gonna read our daily prayer, and there's gonna be a couple announcement also from members of leadership office, and we're gonna jump right to our discussion of the day. All right. So if you allow me, pull out the prayer. Oh, Almonra, Mother will feed us, Father will protect us. You watch upon the creation, you are the creation. O Amonra, your breath is the pulse of the cosmos. Your shadow covers the universe, from east to west, from north to south. O Amonra, my heart is humble before your majesty. O Amonra, protect all of us. We are mortal and fallible. Remove from our path all obstacles and protect us from illness, meanness, greed, and envy. O you noble spirit, you watch upon the creation, you are the creation. We feel your presence in water, fire, earth, and air. We can hear you in thunder, in ocean waves. Your brilliance is that of stars in the midnight sky. Your radiance is that of the sun in the noon sky. O you noble ancestor, you watch upon the creation. You are the creation. Our blood is your blood, our flesh is your flesh. Look after us, we implore you. Some did not wake up this morning, some will not go to bed tonight. Keep us alive, keep us healthy, protect our children and their children, protect, protect our wives and husbands, protect our neighbors and friends, protect Africa, which needs it so much. Protect us who testify today about your greatness. Protect us, we who keep shrine dedicated to you and your glory. Oh, you noble ancestor, the days is long, the night is long, and the opportunities to betray Mahat are numerous and constant. Allow our heart to be inundated with Mahatic thoughts. Allow that from our mouth only come Mahat and Mahat only. Give us the courage and the strength, the integrity and the determination to fight for a better world, for an Africa that is united, strong, and free. For brothers and sisters who do not feel inferior anymore. Remind us all the time that it is better to die standing up than to live on our knees. Oh, you noble ancestor, like you, we wish through our action on earth in this life that you gave us earn eternal life. Keep us on the path of Mahat help us defeat his fate, so that our children's and our children's call upon our name. Remind us night and day, whether you are asleep or awake, that unity is our aim and victory is our destiny. Ashe. Ashe.
So, I guess I'll give you a minute for a technical thing. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I was gonna say I have 2 profiles up because my webcam doesn't work where I'm presenting. So you can see my face on my phone, but
Zach, you're gonna have to mute your phone because you have 2 mics, and so we're getting a little bit of feedback here. But before you come on to present, just let Shanuti just do some really quick announcements, and then he'll introduce you and we'll bring you on. But if you're speaking right now, we can't hear you, so one of your mics has to be open. The other one you can mute. So unmute the mic. Unmute the mic on your computer and mute the mic on your phone.
So the one on my computer is open.
So okay, well mute the mic on your phone then.
I thought it was muted. All right.
All right, speak now. Say something.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is double?
Yeah, we're getting double. Do you have your YouTube open or something?
YouTube, no. Yeah, nowhere through.
Hold up. If you have 2 devices and you're logged into Zoom, if they're next to each other, then it's going to cause that echo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I don't know how to. I guess maybe you guys don't need to see me.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we ain't gonna be able to see your face today, brother. So,
I mean, that's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, I think Sister Olombe is saying something, but she's mute.
All right. So is it double now?
No, I think it's fine.
It's double. It's fine.
It's fine.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
All right. So really quick, I think we have a few announcements here. The one thing I maybe have to say here is that we have a AI week start coming up this next week. So we hope that all of you are going to be attending to some of the events we will be presenting. Most of them are in Zoom. They're all on Zoom. We're going to have, I think, one event. Well, Wahida can probably give it better idea. She can give you the entire schedule. She knows it better. But we're going to have an event next week to present on Zoom. So hopefully you all going to be able to join. But I want to greet some of the new people I may not know here. I see the Sister Janine, right? Sister Twi. I want to welcome you to this general meeting. It's the first time I think you joining to the general meeting. So I want to make sure that you're going to have like a wonderful experience today. Maybe you want to say a few words to this audience, just a few words,
Thank you. So I appreciate the greetings. My name is Sister Talin, and I'm just happy to be here to, to learn and to continue to grow in the pathway of Afrocentric spirituality, and to help further advance the work that is so desperately needed in our homes and communities. So thank you.
No problem. Well, we're glad to have you. And hopefully someday we're gonna all have the opportunity to meet and greet each other properly. I know sometimes we skip that step. It is important that we get to know each other as we grow. At some point, we're gonna get so big that we never get. It's important that as we growing, we at least who's around us and who can do what for each of them. So I will let the other officers. They have some announcement as well. I will let Tata go ahead, and you might have some announcement for our people here. Tata, you.
Peace, Yes, peace family. Thanks, Trinity. Just a general reminder that we are in the Q2 dues collection period. So if you have not paid your dues and you are a member, then we would appreciate that if you would make that contribution to us. And I'm going to put the link to the membership application in the chat, just in case there are any new people that are on that are interested in becoming members but haven't yet filled out the membership application. That's all I have, Shanity. Back to you.
So now, probably Wawa, you want to add a few things here too?
Yeah, I have some announcements. First of all, AI Week is this week. AI Week is Ronan Hollins, can you mute your mic, please? Thank you. We will kick off with Malcolm X Day with a tribute. That will be May 19th, starting at, I believe, 9 a.m. We'll also be then doing the Anatomy of a Renaissance amidst the global shift on Saturday, May 23rd. That begins at 1 o'clock. That will be with a panelist including Parat, Dr. Amma Mazama, Sesh Malefi Kete Asante, Dr. Obadele Camben, and Professor Baina Bello. Following that on Sunday, we will be doing our African children's stories telling. That'll be at noon. Then later in the day, we'll have at 3 o'clock the Reimagining a United Africa with Brother Omawale and Sesh Malefi. And then after that, to conclude, we will have our African Liberation Day watch party running all day long. We have some film selection that will release sometime this week. We'll let you know which film screenings we selected. And that'll be on the 25th, starting, I believe, like 9 or 10 a.m. So that's for AI Week rundown. You can go to Eventbrite and get all the information on that. As far as communications, I do have a couple announcements for that. First of all, I did send out an email earlier today to everybody. You should have received that to get some general information about what hashtags are for, like the goals that we have for them, so you understand the purpose of it and why we can all collectively work together to help push the events that we have, or programming, or whatever it is, whatever our agenda is, we can help push that out together with all of our networks. So you should have received that. Please read through it. It's just brief. But to piggyback off of that, we did decide to do some giveaways to help boost, just the boost people knowing about our AI Week events. So you can win either a 6255 t-shirt, or you can win a African Foundation's One workbook. The instructions for all of that on eligibility are in the Eventbrite. If you have any questions on that, you can reach out to myself, wahida.muhammad@aiphilly.org. I'm sorry, at gmail.com. wahida.muhammad.ai@gmail.com. The last thing I do have to mention is that the Communications Committee will be creating an AI Philly COVID-19 pamphlet with tips and information to disseminate to the community, along with our African Families Fitness and Survival Handbook, and also the elder care bags. So you can look out for that in the coming weeks. We will need our crisis response team to submit information for that. As far as the website, I believe that there was a meeting yesterday on that, so that should be coming up shortly, and we will implement some sort of methodology as far as all the committees getting the information to the Communications Committee, so that we know how we can get the information onto our website. That's all I have for today. Make sure you do participate in the giveaway campaign. And you're all eligible to participate as well if you want to win a t-shirt or a workbook. You do have to follow the instructions, however. And again, check the Eventbrite page for that. I will post, either myself or one of the other Communication Committee members will post something across our social media platforms, and that will be what you'll be able to share. We haven't done it yet, so we'll get that out later today. All right, Shinudi?
Okay, so Brother Maurice, do you have anything you want to add here?
Yeah, Hotep, everybody. This is Brother Maurice, part of the outreach coordination team. I just want to say that, those of you on the line, we came up with an idea to reach out to our membership via phone. If you have not received a phone call from any of our committee members, you can reach out to me and let me know. If you are interested in being a part of reaching out to our community, please reach out to me for that as well. Also, continue to share information across your social media platform about AI Week, please, with folks that you know that are in the community. We all are in this together, so we ask that you share that information. And I think that's all I have for right now. Shaniti.
Thank you. Brother Moali, are you back or anything?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm running back and forth from my computer to downstairs, but really quick. Thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Brother Omawale, the Vice Shanudi of AI Philly. It looks like we have about 14 people. Baby girl, please, can you grab her for me? It looks like we have about 14 people that are currently viewing on YouTube. So we just ask that you please like, subscribe, and share the video. Throughout the duration, you can grab her, the camera's not on, it's okay. Yeah. So throughout the duration of our, for the remainder of this, I guess, COVID-19 social distancing, our meetings will be held virtually. So we'll be using Zoom and YouTube to stream our general membership meeting. So we just ask that you definitely subscribe to our channel. Please like, because liking and sharing is what helps us to get the information out. So that's my announcement, and I'm definitely looking forward to the presentation today from one of my favorite scholars.
All right, thank you, Brother Moali. So again, I appreciate support from all of you. Our organization needed a lot. If you want to donate, if you wish to donate, don't hesitate to contact us. It's important that we all participate to the liberation of our people, our continent, and it's not free. So, but today the discussion is going to be led by Brother Zach. I've known Zach now for about 3 years since I became the Shanudi of AI, and he's a very bright brother. When it comes to discussing dislocation and Afrocentricity, is one of the, I mean, in this generation, is one of the most grounded, the most knowledgeable about the philosophy of Afrocentricity. He's a student at Temple in the Africology department. Zach also taught, yeah, I don't know if he actually does, but I know from my discussion he taught history in high school to the young people, and it's something that he enjoys discussing with young people and educate people. Zach is a huge fan of hip hop and African American culture in general, and he always know how to kind of bring like a perspective of the actual and modern culture of African people here, and how he can bring it all together and be able to explain a little bit what is going on around us. So when it comes to a topic like the one we have today, Afrocentricity, African civilization and entertainment, I'm sure that it's going to be a lot of things that are going to come from this discussion. So I'm very proud to present him, Zach, for this discussion, and now I'm going to let him do his thing, and we're going to step back and just take a good listen. Thank you again, and Sante Sana, and Zach, it's all you now.
All right, hello everybody. Can you guys hear me? Yep. All right, that's great. So basically, again, my name is Zach Brooks. I'm a PhD student here at Temple University. Not here, I mean, I live around the corner, but you know, Corona, you're trapped in the house. So yeah, so today I decided to elaborate more on a project and a presentation that I had done. I presented at the National Council of Black Studies in New Orleans last year in March. And so I wanted to basically, exactly the way Shanudi said, like I wanted to blend Afrocentricity together with maybe a lighter topic, but also a topic that many of us may be familiar with, but also something that I kind of enjoy for myself. So I titled it Afrocentricity, African Civilization and African Entertainment, because I chose to focus on the Black Panther series, Marvel's Black Panther series, because I'm a big fan of Black Panther. I love the movies. I read the comic books. I actually even bought the DVD of the show. You know, they had a short series that was like 6 episodes on BET where Jill Scott played Storm and Djimon Hounsou played Black Panther, Kerry Washington. It was like all these notable Black people, so I loved it, you know. But at the same time, I'm critical thinker, so you know it's hard for me to shut my mind off. So even when I'm enjoying something, I can still see some of the underlying conceptual problems, historical problems, political problems that are embedded within even things that I like. So to begin, I just want to give a special thanks to Afrocentricity International for hosting me, for all of my friends and family, everybody who gave me a little bit of guidance, a little support, you know, a little reassurance, all of those kinds of things. And most importantly, to our ancestors, who we would not be here without, who I wouldn't know anything that I know without them and what they've done before me. So getting into the purpose of the presentation, I chose to focus on Black Panther because I wanted to illuminate the ways that Europeans in particular impose their ways of thinking upon us as African people, and especially our children, through subtle forms of Eurocentric propaganda about African history embedded within the comic book series, Marvel's Black Panther. And 2, I'd like to offer Afrocentricity as both a corrective and a tool for us to use so we can fix these problems, so we can understand what it is, the problems that we're facing, and how it is we can go about developing solutions towards these problems. So I don't want this presentation to just be a complete list of all of the damages that white people and whoever have done to us, even if, you know, some of the things that they're doing are embedded within the content that we're discussing. It's not a complete L. We have not lost. It's not complete. We're not completely victimized. There is agency. There is our ability to understand ourselves and to go about things differently and to change our conditions. So the only way we can do that, though, is if we systematically displace ideas that confuse us about ourselves, our history, and our culture. So I wanted to reorient us towards a critical engagement with content that is explicitly produced for entertainment value amongst the general public, because oftentimes things that are presented as entertainment are often presented within the light as they're lighthearted, it's neutral, it's meaningless. This is just, you know, why you gotta be so deep, you know, those kinds of things. Sorry, what's that on my phone? Okay, I'm good. So there's a lot of moving parts to my presentation, so I tried my best to frame it within 3 larger categories. So I want to begin with our foundations and framing and how we're approaching this issue. And I want to talk about some of the limitations with how we are taught to approach analysis. And the whole purpose of Afrocentricity is for us to be able to analyze things within our own terms, grounded within our own history and culture, to be centered. So I used the symbol of a jed, which is an ancient Egyptian symbol, which means your foundation, or it's a place to stand, as Dr. Asante elaborates in his book, An Afrocentric Idea. It's our place to stand. It's not physical, it's conceptual. I mean, so that's beginning with that. Then the next one, I want to go into the importance of civilization or societal models, African civilization, why it's so important, why it's important that we understand not only our history, but we need to understand how or what the implications are for other people's history, learning other people's history, and what happens when we only know other people's history and we don't know our own, and how some of that can be implicit and embedded within some of the content that I'm discussing. And then I'll get directly into Black Panther. That's the Wakandan flag for you, those of you guys that don't follow the series. Going forward. And throughout the presentation, I'm a big fan of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. As many of you know, I constantly talk about her. I'm almost to the point of obsession. I gotta chill. But basically, in the introduction to her book, The ISIS Papers, she makes a very powerful point about the power of symbols. And I want us to keep that in mind throughout the presentation. I intentionally added many images and symbols, both from comic books, from the internet, and also artwork that I found that I felt reflects some of the ideas that I was trying to portray and get across to you guys. So hopefully you guys pick up on some of that. Hope you guys appreciate it. So according to Dr. Welsing, symbols that are expressed on the conscious level still function at the subconscious level of what she calls the brain computer to embed highly compacted messages pertaining to the origin, identity, and survival of individuals and collective peoples. So I want us to keep that in mind. And a direct quote from Dr. Welsing is, symbols communicate from one person's subconscious to the subconscious of another who shares the same identity and survival necessity. So this goes into why I chose Black Panther. He's the first Black or African superhero that came to prominence in the United States. And, you know, through superheroes, many times, and through cartoons, as I discussed to many of my friends, you know, I watch anime. You know, a lot of the time in cartoons, children, and not just children, people in narratives, they identify with the protagonist. They identify with the main character of whatever the series or whatever the show, or even not just the main character, the characters in general. You identify with them, and that's, you know, your emotions become attached to them. So when these superheroes have these explosions of power, you feel those explosions of power too. And, you know, part of what superheroes and part of, you know, comic books and part of, you know, stories and narratives in general are these stories, they activate our agency. They activate our imagination. Our mind shapes what we perceive ourselves to be capable of. And these ideas about what we're capable of, these are interweaved into the images that we perceive, we see, that are part of entertainment. So going into the first section, Zajed, I like this quote. It's from the introductory chapter of our Parat, my teacher, Dr. Amamazama. And she basically talks about how colonization was not simply an enterprise of economic exploitation and political control, as it is commonly held, but an ongoing enterprise of conceptual distortion and invasion, leading to widespread confusion and ultimately mental incarceration. So I want us to keep that in mind, because I'm going to go into the conceptual framework, some of the problematic conceptual framework that is presented as universal and neutral. And I want to go into the kind of conceptual framework we will be approaching the rest of the study in. I understand this might be the slower part, but I really think it's an important part to guide the rest of the presentation. So beginning with our perspective, I'd like to talk about the three most important aspects, or the three pyramidal elements of the Afrocentric framework: grounding, orientation, and perspective. So beginning with grounding, your grounding is your knowledge of African history and cultural experiences. So if you don't know your past, how do you know how to think about your future? You know, so a lot of the time, the way you think is shaped by the history, by your understanding of your own history and culture. So that's what's called epistemology for a lot of people, and in philosophy and scholastic circles. Excuse me. The second one I want to talk about is our orientation. Where do we choose to focus and what do we value? So it's our axiology. It's a system of values. So our interests, where we choose to focus is a reflection of our orientation. So, when we invite people to join us as a part of Afrocentricity International, we have a reorientation program because we want our members coming into our program to understand what it is that our mission is, what our focus is, and what kinds of things we'd like to focus on so we can organize our programming. So it's your orientation. And lastly, the most important perspective, the most important aspect of the Afrocentric framework, Afrocentricity is better understood not as a worldview, not as African-centered, because these kinds of terms, oftentimes, they're not as rigid, or they don't have as much structure conceptually as we need in order to point us in the right direction. So Afrocentricity is better understood as a perspective, better than if we wanted to call it a worldview or anything else. It is a state of mind, it's a consciousness, it's all of these things, but it's a perspective most importantly. So it's in a perspective, it's self-conscious. You need to think about the way you're approaching things just as much as the way someone might be influencing the way you're approaching it, or the way you're looking at it, and the way you're interacting with the world. And a lot of that has implications for who we are, our ontology, our way of being. So, and our cosmology is kind of how we see, how do we fit ourselves into the rest of the cosmos and the universe and the world, and how do we see those things? So that's what perspective is for us, okay? So, I invented some of these images myself, like up in the top right corner, it's an eyeball with a lens, but I wanted, in the introduction to Afrocentric Paradigm, Dr. Mazama, she goes into a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And that's why she chose the word paradigm, because she wants us to systematically approach the way that we produce new forms of knowledge. And for many people, they would consider that to be science, a scientific approach. So we're trying to approach this from a scientific angle, a methodology, a system. So we know what the end result will be every time because it's systematic. We know what kinds of knowledge. We know we're trying to produce knowledge towards the liberation of our people. So we need that kind of structure, And, and for people who didn't understand the microscope thing, I made it a triangle, and hopefully that image kind of helps you. Moving on to the next one. This one's a little bit more wordy, but I want to talk about the dangers of the Eurocentric approach to studying things, the Eurocentric approach to the production of knowledge. So when we look at objectivity, which is embedded within what's called the scientific method, which is even taught to our children as young as first, second, third, however grade, they're trying to teach, so a lot of time, many times we come to the complaint that, white people are presenting themselves as normal. They present their way of thinking, their way of being, their understanding of themselves, their understanding of us, their perspective is normal. So, and what that is it's objectivity, but that's invisible. So they teach you to be objective. They teach you to alienate yourself from your own perspective in order to become non-biased, or what are other words that they use? They say, they use science in the way they make objectivity synonymous with science. So then they give themselves the monopoly over the way we understand science, right? But if we're being a bit more critical about that, the way people understand science is very connected to the way people understand spirituality and themselves in terms of their own spirituality. Because spirituality is about how everything is interconnected. So their scientific view is also their religious view. So what objectivity is they give themselves a God complex. you know, and then they teach us the same God complex, but they don't give us the back, you know, the support and the confidence and the knowledge of our own history and culture to make ourselves sacred and to make ourselves divine, you know, and to view our own culture as divine and sacred, you know. So they privilege themselves by calling their perspective science, and then they call your perspective backward, or they call your perspective angry, or your perspective emotional, or your perspective those kinds of things. So that's what objectivity is. It's non-biased. It's this supposed omnipotent surveyor. You know, you know it all. You're supposed to know it. How can you be non-biased if you don't know everyone else's opinion? So, you know, with a culturally neutral perspective, they tell you their perspective is neutral. It's culturally neutral, and it's not. So objectivity is a way of thinking developed within knowledge from European history and culture, and operates as a veil to disguise Eurocentric assumptions as universal, neutral, normal, and worse, ideal. So next is within the Eurocentric framework, progress is an ideological orientation toward assimilation into European culture and white controlled society. So I want us to think about, from our perspective, we use Afrocentricity to produce our ideologies, our ways of thinking, our approach to our politics and ways of thinking. Europeans have done the same thing with objectivity, but because they disguise themselves as objective or as God, now they need to give you something universal so that they can capture all of their ideologies under it, and it's a seemingly harmless term. So they use the word progress. So when they want us to become like them, they think that we are on a track on the evolutionary ladder to evolve into them in order to become them. Because if we're not them, then we're seen as children or animals or objects or backward or archaic or ghetto, or, you know, whatever. You can come up with a million negative terms that Eurocentric thinkers use to describe African people. So I love Dr. Marimba Ani, so I used her quote, trying to keep it simple: by camouflaging European political interests as universal human goals, Europeans disarm victims of their imperialism. They disarm you. They take away your ability to think critically. You don't think critically because you don't think it's them. You think it's neutral, right? And another scholar I love, Dr. Amos Wilson. He has a book called The Falsification of African Consciousness. It's a brief book. And in his chapter about, if I'm not mistaken, where I got this quote, should have cited where I got it, but he has a chapter called History is Psychohistory. And what he said, I just wrote the introductory sentence. He says, I'm going to look briefly at European history as mythology, as propaganda, and as the creator of personality. European mythology can only work against us where there is an absence of contact with reality, an absence of knowledge of African history. And that's so powerful. That's such a powerful and simple way of framing that. So if they deny us contact from our history, then what we need to do is go back and get it. We need Sankofa, right? So I included this quote from Dr. Jacob Carruthers, because not only do we need to go back and get our history, some of the problems with studying our history is we bring the conceptual baggage of Europe with us when we study their history. So you'll see terms like when you study West African history, they'll call it feudal West Africa, or they call it the Dark Ages, but all of these terms are categories for the way that Europeans have created episodes within their own history. There's modernity, there's the Dark Ages, there's the antiquity. Like they have the way they break up their history, and based on the way they break up their history, that's the way they try to organize yours. So what we do is African champions must learn to break the chain that links African ideas to European ones and listen to the voice of our ancestors without European interpreters. So many times, excuse me, somebody going? Somebody has a question? I'm going kind of fast. How about does anybody have a question before I move on? No?
Where did the Jacob Carruthers quote come from?
All right, it's one of two books. So it's either Intellectual Warfare, or it's the other one called the Metanet. It's called Meta Nature. I forgot. It's a long subtitle. It's either Meta Nature or Intellectual Warfare. I can I'll double back with you after the presentation.
All right, thanks, brother.
Okay, so again, Sankofa, it's so important. Go back and get it. And not only do we go back to get it, the more we learn the history of our ancestors, the more we can lean upon them and depend upon them to guide us in our understanding and how we do what we do now. To the point, literally to the point that our ancestors can move through us. We become our ancestors. We are our ancestors, right? But we can only do that if we understand our ancestors on their terms, who they were, not who they were from the perspective of the people who came to control and dominate and oppress them. We need to know it from the perspective of themselves. So I chose to focus on Black Panther. Going into Black Panther, I'm focusing on the group of women in the Black Panther. So before we get to the Black Panther, I gotta show you a little bit about the actual history of African women. You know, we gotta put our hand on it. So I've started all the way back to Kush, where you know, she's not the first, but I love her. Her name is Emanerines. She's a warrior who led the entire nation of Nubia or Kush. That was his older name, but it ultimately became Nubia. That's what the Romans called it. And basically, when the Romans conquered Egypt, they tried to move further south into Africa. And that's when they ran into the Nubians and they caught that problem. And basically, Emanerines, she washed the Romans. She destroyed them. They were not able to infiltrate inner Africa. So anytime we deal with history of conquest from Europeans, there's always going to be African resistance. There's always going to be an effort for us to maintain ourselves and protect ourselves. It's always there. The problem is they don't want to they always erase or obscure or distort that aspect of the history, because when we know those histories, then we have a blueprint from where to organize ourselves in the present. So moving forward from Kush, from the ancient world and the ancient Nile Valley, moving forward to West Africa, I have Yai Santewa. She's a queen mother of the Ashanti people, and we'll get into her more directly because I actually have something in Black Panther in the comic book, in the most recent one, that draws directly from her inspiration, but we'll get further into that. And I wanted to talk about who's going to be presenting with our organization later, Baina Bello, who's a great scholar of African history, especially of Haitian history. And she just had this short book called Sheroes of the Haitian Revolution, where she discusses at, not necessarily at length, it's beautiful pictures, and it's a short summary of different historical personalities of women who fought in the Haitian Revolution, who fought against France. And the Haitian Revolution is so powerful because that is one of the most, it's not the first or the only, but it's one of the most significant victories that African people had against European domination, European colonialism, the global system of racism, white supremacy, because that's when African people organized themselves, used their own culture, understood themselves, and asserted themselves to protect and defend themselves against the three most powerful nations, European nations in the world, and defeated all of them. So that's what we're made of. People in the Western Hemisphere we are of the same, we're you know, maybe there's a little more Igbo there, or a little more Hausa there, or a little more Mandinka, or a little more Akan here or there in different parts of the Caribbean, or in the United States, or in South America, but we're all of the same ethnic composition and racial stock of these people, of the Haitians. We're the same people. I mean, you know, based on where we are, we may take a different name. We may have had different environmental circumstances over the past couple hundred years. And when I say environmental, I mean different historical engagements with, you know, different governments, different this, different that. Maybe we chose to focus more on this aspect of our culture and that aspect, but fundamentally, at our core, at our base, our essence, we are the same people. So moving not just there, I want to take it directly to African Americans. I want to talk about Harriet Tubman, who everybody knows was such a great leader. And she didn't just run away. They always like to tell you about how she was a runaway. She absolutely was a runaway. She was also a spy and a military commander. So she is just as much an African warrior as any of the other women that I have mentioned before. So I'm just trying to show a continuum. And I'm trying to bring it as close to the present as possible. I mean, I'm sure there are other women that we can talk about, but I wanted to bring it directly to Black Panthers. So when we talk about Black Panthers, when I look at Assata Shakur, I think of Harriet Tubman, 100%. Assata Shakur is Harriet Tubman. So, I mean, she was part of the Black Liberation Army, which is the military wing of some of the Black Panther chapters. So it was like, you know, and they knew exactly what kind of problem that, not even what she did, the image she poses to other people, that inspiration that she has. So to this day, Governor Christie is still trying to get people to get Assata Shakur extradited back to the United States. It's not over for them. They know it's not over. So it's important for us to reclaim our ancestors and to understand who these people are, so that they can guide us in how we understand and relate to each other, and how we understand ourselves. So these women are going to be the model from which that I'm coming from when I talk about these African women. So on a conceptual level, in terms of when we talk about gender, I don't like gender identity. I like gender social roles, because gender within Africa was never just an identity. Your gender was associated with the role that you performed within society. So because I'm focusing on warriors, I'd like to focus on the construction of a warrior. How do people construct a warrior? How do people understand what a warrior is within the context of gender? So throughout military history, in general, across cultures, warfare and the social role of warrior has been predominated by men, largely due to their physical prowess when it comes to physical strength and muscle mass. If you want people who can engage in war in terms of literal fighting, I'm not talking about debate, I'm not talking about whatever, I'm talking about just straight up war. In general, it's predominated by men. That's not to say women have not participated. We're about to get into women's participation within war and the difference in their participation in war in different societies. So it's very different. The way women engaged in war and the way they were understood and perceived of within the context of war is very different within the West or within Europe or even amongst Arabs or many Eurasian cultures. It's very different than the way we understood African women within the context of African civilization and their role in war when African people had power, right? When they do have power, or when they're asserting power, when they're seeking power. So association with femininity does not reflect pathology within African culture. You know, like weakness and femininity go hand in hand within European culture. I mean, I'm sure many of us can find many examples of how femininity is a reflection of a problem to Europeans. I mean, it's embedded within even their creation myths. I mean, they talk about Eve, Adam and Eve, and then they make Eve the one who is the problem. She's the embodiment of sin and temptation. You see, not that kind of conceptualization never existed within any African cultures. That's a European construct. So so I want to go into the warriors. So basically, let's talk about the Amazons, who are said to have existed, but they're also mythologized. They're a big part of Greek history. I don't know if you guys, like me, I like to play video games. I like my first contact with Amazons were in God of War, and then there's Wonder Woman, so there's Amazon. So basically they're using their history as the inspiration for the way, or not the inspiration, I guess you could say inspiration. They're using their history as a model for the way that they understand women within the context of war. So one of our great and legendary scholars, Cheikh Anta Diop, he's from Senegal. He's a walking, I don't know what to call him, a library. I don't want to call him a librarian. He's such a huge scholar and studied so many different aspects of African civilization. And he wrote a book called The Cultural Unity of Black Africa, the Domains of Matriarchy and of Patriarchy. And what he does within the book is he goes through a couple different historical narratives in different societies to talk about how the environment in which people exist shapes their culture. So basically in the Eurasian steppes where Greece and Rome are, physical prowess was the way that they would organize their understanding of power. So when they looked at women, they didn't view them as powerful, even when women were able to exercise power. So when they're able to exercise power, now they're seen as men. But that's a stigma. So there comes social stigma with that. So basically, those women who took up the roles of warrior in Greece, they were stigmatized for being warriors. They were seen as big and large and, this and that, So when they were alienated from their own society, they created their own societies. They became marauders. They became outcasts. They became outliers. They were marginal to their own society. So Cheikh Anta Diop basically says, Amazonism, far from being a variation of matriarchy, appears as a logical sequence of the excesses of extreme patriarchy, right? That's consistent with European history. That's their history. So it makes sense how Amazons came to be within the context of their history. So, but again, they're using Greece as the model. Greece is such, ancient Greece and Rome, that's at the core of the way the West and Europeans have defined and understood civilization. And they teach other people to understand civilization. Greece and Rome, that's where you go. When we talk about democracy is the class of the demos. The demos are the property owners, the people who own slaves. So those people, slavery and democracy within Athens becomes the model for the way Western societies organize their own societies. So when we look at slavery and democracy, it's going hand in hand. It's like, they think, some people are trying to come up with progressive ideas about democracy, that they think they can change democracy into something that it has never been. But remember, just as we are our ancestors, they are theirs. So, so Dr. Asante, when he was coming up with Afrocentricity, he was theorizing Afrocentricity. One of the things that he told us in class, he says, it took me 30 years to get Greece out of my head. And I didn't understand how profound that statement was until I started running into the same kinds of problems later. It's like, wow, it's like they really box you in to to their history. And you don't understand that what the ideas and the ideologies and the concepts and the terms and the names and all of these things, you know, you don't realize that you're operating from their civilizational model, you know? So when you finally get out of that, now we can learn to assert our civilizational model. We can use African civilization as a model to model our lives, to build our organizations, to build nations that will reflect the interests of our people, right? So bottom line, I'm very matter of fact with myself. Bottom line, women warriors of Dahomey are not Amazons of Greece. So, I mean, I want to go back to this. I'm going to get into the women warriors of Dahomey. I'll get into them because they're the model for what I'm going to talk about in Black Panther. I've came across in my studies, I worked at the Charles Bloxton collection in North Philadelphia. It's here at Temple University. And I came across a couple images because we had a program about Harriet Tubman where we actually had a screening for the most recent film. And you know, we also had a couple actors and a couple scholars and people. We had a program about Harriet Tubman, and I saw some pictures where people call Harriet Tubman a Black Amazon, same as they call, you know, the Dahomey warriors that we'll talk about Amazons. I've even seen one of my friends, his dissertation is focusing on the Haitian Revolution. They call the women who participated in the Haitian Revolution, they call them Amazons. So it's everywhere. That's the model, you see? So so here we're getting into the quote, the so-called Dahomey Amazons, right? So I want to talk about what they originally were. These female warriors were originally commissioned by the Dahomey king, excuse the way I pronounce it, Wegbaja, for hunting elephants. And they were referred to as the Jibeto, which means huntress in the Fawn language. So basically, if you're a hunter, you know, you have the same skill set as a soldier, you know? So these women, when it came time to talk about trade and ivory and, you know, elephant meat and those kinds of things, the king sent them to go hunt elephants. But when it came time for the Dahomey, who was a tributary, or basically a nation that was basically, they were ruled by the Oyo Empire, the Yoruba at one point. So basically, when they decided they wanted to break away from the Oyo Empire, you know, these women fought against the Yoruba. But they didn't only fight against the Yoruba, they had many military engagements. So it's like, and I would just want to say, beyond their military ranking and classifications, these women have been referred to as Mino, which means our mothers. So I don't speak Fawn, and I know I probably butchered the names, and I really do apologize, but it's important that we recognize the indigenous names, the way that these people understood and defined themselves, so we can understand what their roles were. So when they say our mothers, these women sat on councils, on the highest councils of governance inside of their own societies. These women were generals. These women, so what I mean is they weren't just acknowledged for their physical prowess the way men are sometimes, but also for their wisdom, for their social roles as mothers and leaders and guiding the rest of the society, the mothers of the society, right? And it's important the context in which the first time we see these women come to popular attention, at least in the West and in Europe and the United States, is after France they had succeeded in conquering many parts of what's now Senegal. And when they come into modern day Benin, that's where Dahomey is modern day Benin. So basically, their war efforts against the French is basically why the French were like, wow, these women they're the fiercest people we've ever fought, like ever. You know, like they were so impressed by the sheer like ferocity and ability to fight and win against their troops that they had to acknowledge it. It's like, dang, it's like we came over here to conquer you and take over your society to see what we can extract from you. And but again, back to Dr. Mazama's point about colonization being an invasion of conceptual distortion. What they do is they name you when they claim you, you know? So that's when they stop becoming Domino, our mothers, or they stop being Jabeto, and they start becoming the Amazons, because Europeans know how to assert their own cultural power. So when they want to take control of a people, they have to name the people. So they named the people Amazons based on their history and culture. But if we look at the history and the context under which these women were organized, the role they played in society, and those kinds of facts, we can see that the term Amazon isn't quite accurate to describe them on their own terms. These women within African terms, they're within the way they understood themselves. So again, back to Sheikh Anta Diop, what he elaborates about these women is, he says the fact that these companies were created and led by men proves that the situation of these women was radically different from that of the classical Amazons, who could not conceive of fighting under male orders. They were no more Amazons than the members of the auxiliary women's corps of modern European armies. We know here in the United States, there are women in most of the branches, if not all of the branches of the army here in the United States, in America, right? But these women, yeah, sure, the American women, or the French women, or the whatever British women, or we could talk about the homie. These women were not fighting on behalf of their gender; they were fighting on behalf of their nation. You see, so yeah, I mean, it's okay for them to, like, say like, yeah, like, we're better than men, we do this, we do that, those kinds of smaller things. But when that becomes your background, that becomes the assumption you organize your life from, the way that you think and approach to organizing an entire group of people, then what you do is you create a fracture between the people. So I focused on the Amazons because these women were elaborated upon in Black Panther, right? How am I doing on time? Can't see the time on my phone. Okay, it's all right. So again,
take your time, Zach. You don't got to rush. You're good.
Okay, I do feel like am I moving too fast? Is everybody okay?
No, you're going at a good pace. Go ahead, brother. Take your time.
Yes,
Okay.
you're fine. You're
You're doing
fine.
good.
Good.
Okay, I don't want to go over anybody's head, but I guess please write down questions, and I'll field questions towards the end. So I guess I was doing this PowerPoint and transition the way my mind works, so I kind of covered this. But again, Dr. John Henrik Clarke, another one of our great historians. I plan to deal with him in my dissertation some way or form. I have not started it yet, so don't put pressure on me, but I'll get there. So again, he in his book called The African Holocaust, Slavery and Capitalism at Christopher Columbus Era. I'm butchering the name of his book. It's a short book, it's a great book. But in the beginning of the book, he says, there weren't enough soldiers in Europe to take over the continent of Africa, India, the Caribbean, and North and South America. The greatest achievement of Europeans was the conquest of the mind of their victims through a series of myths that could bear re-examination in order to understand the deeper meaning of the Christopher Columbus era and its reverberations today. He's talking about starting at 1492. So we're talking about starting at 1492. That's the way we're framing the way we approach our own history. If we only begin 500 years ago, some people begin at 1619. Some people begin with, 1864, when slavery ended. It's like, you're cutting yourself off from the rest of your history. You're beginning your history with slavery. You're beginning your history with your own domination. You don't begin your history in the light of your own power, your own culture. You don't begin history in that way. So that we need to go further back in our history. Sankofa, go back and get it, right? and so that we can understand ourselves under the context of white supremacy on our own terms. That's what makes it so political right now. So going into comic books, finally, lighter topics, kind of. So again, so I chose to focus on comic books. I wanted to give a little context to the way literature and literary content in general, including television, the way it's shaped within entertainment. So the representation of Africa and African people in comic books is often taken on the vestiges of the contemporary political climates in which they are produced. So this is what's going on right now. So there's going to be baggage that comes with that. People, unless they're trained to, or they have learned to, see themselves from within the context of their own history or from a historical context in general. Well, there's no in general. They're going to take on some of the pressures and baggages and influences that come along with the representation of certain people, right? So in this book, I shared the cover. I've only read chapters focusing on Black Panther, and they got other chapters, Luke Cage, all kinds of stuff. But it says, in the colonialist fantasy that, quote, Edward Said outlines, the West perceives the East, and in fact, all who can be categorized as others, as mysterious and exotic mythical places filled with primitive natives, bizarre customs, and dangerous environments. This collective fiction of the Orient has long provided a justification for the Western world's domination and subjugation of non-Western nations and people. So what I'm getting at here is novels, literature, TV shows, entertainment functions as propaganda. These images are not neutral, although they are presented as such, and people are taught and trained to approach things as though they themselves are neutral and the content that they're engaging with is neutral. It's not neutral. So when they depict the jungle, they depict the jungle as a wild, untamed, feral place. But there are places in the jungle that people live and create civilization and create their own order on their terms out of. So that's not depicted within many of these images because they have a function as propaganda. Examples I'm using Tarzan because many people can understand that immediately. Like Tarzan, you drop a white man in the jungle and all of a sudden, now we're going to have empathy for the jungle because a white man is feral and backwards and crazy, and now he's the savior of all the backward people in the jungle. I mean, then they change the story. Then they make it less explicit. They change the original story of Tarzan from African people to gorillas, which kind of tells you a lot about how Disney thinks about our people. If you look at Princess and the Frog, Lion King, I can't name a Disney movie where black people aren't depicted as animals. Shout out to Tristan Samuel for pointing that out to me. It changed the way I look at Disney movies forever. And then the other example I use is, so the protagonist in Tarzan is a white guy. If we look at an African nation where somebody is depicted as an African king, especially in the context of American media and American movies, I'm going to go to Paul Robeson. I'm going to go to his movie called Emperor Jones. And, in that movie, that movie is like highly acclaimed and all those kinds of things. But movie critics, especially people who are critical of not just Paul Robeson as not Paul Robeson as a personality, but of the movies and the projects that Paul Robeson has engaged in and has put out. Paul Robeson is understood as the Renaissance man. At one point in American history, and not just American history, throughout the world, Paul Robeson was like one of the most known Black faces, that person in the entire world. Like maybe after Marcus Garvey, it was Paul Robeson at that time. Like it was really like that. Like Paul Robeson was the man. Like he inspired everybody. It doesn't matter what your politics were. Everybody loved Paul Robeson. Malcolm X, he attributes a lot of his admiration for manhood and those kinds of things to Paul Robeson. If you look at even here at the Dr. Charles Blockson at the Blockson collection, he's a Robeson man. Like you get in a conversation with Dr. Robeson, he gonna tell you how big a deal Paul Robeson is. He loved Paul Robeson. We got this big picture on the wall of Paul Robeson. So I just wanted to say, it's like, you know, it's not just comic books, but it's in media in general. So again, going into comic books, you can see how there's a civilizational model, right? So when you look at Wakanda, the inspiration of Wakanda was Ethiopia in many ways, because Ethiopia was perceived as being one of the African nations that had not been conquered by the modern European imperialist powers. So Black people from all over the world look at Ethiopia and they say, this is what we want. We want our own nation. We don't want to be conquered by Europeans across the ocean. We don't want to be conquered by white people here where we live. We don't want to be conquered by white people. We want to have our own nation. So what does that look like? And they looked at Ethiopia. I mean, you can hear it in Marcus Garvey's talk. You can hear it in his language constantly. You hear it in the language of many people throughout the Caribbean, the Rastafari. That's why, you know, they focus so heavily on Ethiopia, because many Rastafari, they're Black nationalists. Not all of them, but many. So, I mean, so Ethiopia meant that to them. So after Black Panther was created by Jack Kirby and the Fantastic Four, is a side hero, Christopher Priest, you know, looked at, you know, what is the inspiration for what Black Panther's homeworld could be? And he developed his idea of Black Panther's homeworld from his understanding of African civilization and Ethiopia. I mean, there's maps in Marvel Comics that show you where Wakanda is. If you look at Wakanda, it's like smack under, it's like in East Africa. It's like directly under Ethiopia. It's actually kind of funny to the level they took it. You know, Marvel, they're not as, I mean, I don't think they're always trying to be, but sometimes they're heavy-handed, you know, as they say. And then when you look at, I want to juxtapose Wakanda, which is an unconquered African nation, to our discussion about African women in warfare. And I want to look at European women in warfare with the Amazons. So if we look at Wonder Woman's homeworld, Themyscira, it's an island that's isolated from the rest of all other societies where no men are allowed, and men don't exist there. And it's interesting the way they deal with Zeus, who's supposed to be her father. It's like he's not even part of the story. He's still there. He still has to be, you know, they still have that white man as the god at the foundation of it all. But it's still interesting to see how Themyscira is an isolated female-only Greek society, which tells you something about the politics of the people who were producing Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman was produced in the era of World War II, when they were trying to encourage many women to work on behalf of America's war efforts across the ocean. But many of these women, white women, took this opportunity, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with. They took their opportunity to basically say, look, this is our moment. So we need to have images and propaganda that reflects our interests. And that became kind of infused with the feminist movement at that point. So later, when you start to get, you know, I mean, not just later, I mean, continuously, it's ongoing, it's still going. You know, when you look at Wonder Woman, it's still a reiteration of the same kind of history. It's still drawing from the same source. It's still drawing from European civilization, even when they engage with others. So again, these are the Black Panther comic books that I chose. The center one is the one that was on it was on BET. It was produced by Reginald Hudlin. And then the one to the left is the most recent one. And I'll be comparing these two to the left. This other image is is an offshoot of Ta-Nehisi Coates' run of Black Panther. It's called World of Wakanda. It's overseen by a woman named Roxane Gay, who's outwardly, explicitly a feminist, and basically, yeah. So, we'll get further into it. Getting into the Dora Milaje. So I've covered a little bit about Christopher Priest. He's the one who expanded, originally Black Panther was created by a man named Jack Kirby. He created many Marvel characters. So Black Panther first shows up in it's a Fantastic Four comic book. He's just like a side hero. But Christopher Priest took it and ran with it. But most notably, there's somebody, he teaches, I don't know exactly where he teaches. He's a good scholar. His name is Dr. Todd Burrows. He works with Jared Ball and I Mix What I Like and those kinds of things sometimes. He's dope. He has an article. I don't have the article on hand. It's okay. And basically what he does is he compares Christopher Priest to Reginald Hudlin. He compares those two. I'm not comparing those two. But basically he says Christopher Priest, because he's a Black liberal, he's maintaining that everything that he's writing within the comic book has to be in some form organized for a white audience. So, when he, even though he talks about Wakanda and he talks about how Wakanda is this and Wakanda is that, he explains what Wakanda is, he invents the Dora Milaje, he knows the inspiration he's pulling from. That's not the focus of depiction. What he does is he takes the king of a sovereign African nation and makes him fight street crime in Harlem, which kind of doesn't make sense. If you think about it, if you're a king, why wouldn't you send your security force or your army or someone to go fight street crime in a neighborhood? It's not even an entire city, it's a neighborhood. So it's like, you can kind of see, like, because Christopher Priest is organizing his ideas of, he's trying to find a balance. He's trying to find the middle ground between African civilization and appealing to a white audience within this Western civilization. So again, that's what we call ontological reduction. That's what you call you're reducing people's being to less. Not to say Black Panther he wasn't expanded at that time. So I'm not gonna just berate Christopher Priest's version of Black Panther. He set the foundation for many of the later iterations and later stories of Black Panther, which is great, and I appreciate him for that. But and that's why I even said, like, he was world building using African civilization. The name, he invented the Dora Milaje, and their name was the Adored Ones. That's what Dora Milaje means, the Adored Ones. And if we look at the women of the Homie, they operated in the same role. They were known as the Adored Ones, but they were also known as sister wives. They're called sister wives for purposes for commitment purposes within governance, or like to their military power, like, because it's organized around a ruler or a king. So it's the same thing with the Dora Milaje. These women, they come from different parts of Wakanda, and they're married to the Panther, Black Panther, because they're his royal security force. It doesn't have anything to do with sex. It doesn't have anything to do with marriage. It's an organizational thing. So marriage functions in an organizational capacity in African history, and it still should. I'm not talking about arranged marriage. That's another topic for another day. I'm talking about organizing. So, yeah, how would you rate Wakanda's intelligence resources? I think that's important because I'm really big on watching shows about the CIA and all this. So it's like, it's funny, like, these women, they function at the capacity of spies and of generals. And when people think about intelligence or military intelligence, the CIA people, they send their people to school. They send their people to learn your history. Even if we look at like Basil Davidson is what's known as an Africanist. He's a European, a white guy who studies African history. He was a part of MI6. He was a part of British intelligence, British military intelligence. So when he retired, he became a historian. So that's what I'm saying. Like, people understand that, understanding their history and understanding culture and they know that it can be politically relevant if you take it to, if you exercise your agency to that degree, right? So again, back to the Dora Milaje. So the Dora Milaje are dope because it's African warriors on our own terms, using Africa as a source of knowledge. That's Sankofa. And here we have Wonder Woman. They gave Wonder Woman a sidekick. You see, ontological reduction. They always got to make you, the child or the second string or, whatever. And then they give you a black version of a Greek Amazon. They just put her in the Greek clothes. She's nowhere near her culture. And guess what her name is? They named her Nubia. I mean, it's kind of interesting to me. Like, so again, Europe as a source of knowledge. Hashtag progress. Sankofa is better than progress. Sankofa is what we need. We don't need any more of their progress. We don't need that. So we do not exist on our own terms, but on borrowed European ones, as our Parat has most wisely written. Again, contemporary analogs to Amazonism, feminism, or what's known as gender conflict theory, when they don't, So the problem is that feminism is an ideology based on power dynamics that are germane to European history and culture, but is presented as universal, neutral, and ideal for all women. I know for many of you who have been on Twitter with me, I mean, it's almost like if you have a problem with feminism, then what they say is you have a problem with women. But no one has a problem with women. It's very simple and reductionist, but that's how people try to approach that, because they try to guilt you into their political ideology, So again, the result is African women become theoretically marginal or decentered within feminist narratives. They use European history as the model. That's the baggage that they use to study African women or Black women. But the terminology, the words that they use, because it comes from Europe, it doesn't always quite fit the way we live our lives. It doesn't fit the way we understand ourselves. It doesn't fit the way we interrelate. But because that's their ideology, there's baggage with that. It's embedded within their terms. It's embedded in their assumptions. So in the mainstream, and this isn't just for women, this is for men too. Men can be feminists. I want to make that very clear. Men are feminists too. So in the mainstream, or rather Eurostream, feminism operates as a compulsory paradigm through which to study gendered social roles in all societies. There's an article by a woman. She's in charge of the Women's Studies Department at Howard University. She actually got her PhD from Temple University. Her name is Dr. Valencia Watkins. She has a great article about how feminism or feminists interpret African history. So there's a white woman, her name is Gail Robbins, and what she does is she studies ancient Egypt. She studies Kemet, but she studies it on Eurocentric terms. So she's constantly fighting with the fact that the women in ancient Egypt don't occupy the same roles as women in European societies or in Greek and Roman or Phoenician or whichever societies. Like, so so the language she has, it reflects that she's trying to impose her feminist perspective on history that is not real, or not that's not the right terminology. It's her trying to shape history to use Europe as the model to understand African history, but it doesn't fit. And she keeps dealing with, oh, it's not as patriarchal. It's like, what do you mean as patriarchal? It's not a patriarchal society. Patriarchy is not how the society is organized. So again, I don't want to leave this with just, this is what they do to us. Part of me expanding my research and expanding maybe this project, maybe a future paper, is there are other alternatives to feminism that are consistent with the Afrocentric paradigm. such as Africana womanism. I know there's another book. Its focus is more heavily on men, but it's still about gender. It's a book called The Man Not by Dr. Tommy Curry. So he's developing an entire field of study that he calls Black male studies. So it's like those kinds of people, they understand the problems of the conceptual baggage that comes along with these kinds of ideas and theories, social theories. So back to Black Panther again. There's a revision. So brief story time a little bit. Briefly, in the Who is Black Panther story, the one that was on BET with Reginald Hudlin, the one I love so much, the way the story is organized is with an understanding of this is Wakanda, this is Wakanda's culture, this is how Wakanda remains sovereign, this is, it's all about Wakanda as a nation on its own terms, existing on its own terms. So the villains come from everywhere else. The villains come from, there's a French guy who's like very familiar with Arab culture, so he's like, and then they have the Juggernaut from the X-Men. He's the American villain. They have a villain called the Black Knight, he comes from the Vatican. And then they have Radioactive Man. He comes from Russia. And then they also have, I'm trying to think if there are any. Oh yeah. And then of course, most notably, if you guys have seen Black Panther movie, there's Claw. And Claw comes from South Africa. He's a Boer. He's a Dutch person from South Africa. So basically, these group of villains all have to come together in order to fight Wakanda or fight the Black Panther. And what they do is they try to use neighboring nations against Wakanda. There's a nation that's called Naganda, where there's an African dictator. And basically he has like all these bank accounts in Europe, and all he likes to, he has like this overabundance of all these white women, like Pusha T video, like Montana, like, it's like, and Black Panther is like, all right, I'm not going to interfere in the affairs of your nation until you interfere in the affairs of my nation. That's when the white people try to use the dictator against Black Panther and his nation and against Wakanda. That's when he's like, I'm coming to get you. So it's an external conflict still. It's an anti-colonial fiction. It's about maintaining the African people's sovereignty, or Wakandan sovereignty. So later, and the Who's Black Panther art, I think it came out in around the early 2000s. That's around the time it came out. It's really good. It's really short. If you wanted to watch it, you want to get it for your kids, you want to get it forever. It's 6 episodes. I mean, like, I love it. Like, I got the comic and I got a little DVD with all 6 episodes on it. I mean, some of my friends have watched it with me, so I've seen it a million times. And so next there's the most recent comic book art that came out as the movie was about to come out. It's called The Nation Under Our Feet. And that was the one by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Many of us in our circle, Afrocentricity International, many of the African Center circles, those kinds of things, we know who Paul Coates is. He operates out of DC. He has a book press. He's been a part of the movement for so long. He was a Black Panther, like, and like father, not like son. So like, he's more of a progressive and a liberal, and he's more like that. So when we go into the new narrative that Ta-Nehisi Coates is taking up, he's the one who's overseeing the next narrative of Black Panther, this one leading up to coming up to the movie. They introduce all of these themes into Wakanda that were never there, in a way to, I guess, they're trying to make Wakanda more complex. They're trying to make it seem as though it's not this puritanical utopia. They use words like pure and utopia because they're trying to say that, you're rigid, you're stuck, you can't, you're being too idealistic. That's the kind of interpretation that I got. It's a condescending demeanor towards African culture and African civilization. So So what they do is they introduce rape camps, so basically between Who is Black Panther and this new one, Marvel has a continuity for their heroes. In between, Black Panther has decided to become part of the Avengers. The Avengers, they don't just fight for Wakanda, they fight for the entire planet Earth. They go to different dimensions, they go to space, they go here, they go there, they go everywhere. So basically Black Panther's like, I can't be the king anymore if I'm fighting everywhere. So what his sister takes over and she becomes the Black Panther. And that's a hot run too. I actually want to do something with that, like with Shuri becoming the Black Panther. In the Reginald Hudlin series, Kerry Washington voices Shuri, which is kind of cool. And so they introduce rape camps. There's these, I'll show you a little bit more about that. But effectively what happens is Wakanda, basically they introduced the precedent for civil war inside of Wakanda. Black Panther's gone. Shuri, she got taken out by Dr. Doom. And basically Black Panther's T'Challa, the guy who's Black Panther, he's forced to return and resume his role as the king. But, basically the people in Wakanda, they look at him as the orphan king. They look at him as a king without a people. He does not reflect the interests of Wakanda. They feel like he abandoned them. So they basically create the pretext for there to be civil war inside of Wakanda. Basically, so this sovereign nation has been colonized now. Dr. Doom, you have intergalactic invaders, you have Narmer, he's basically like Aquaman. They basically have a war between Wakanda and Atlantis, and another nation conquers Wakanda and tears it up. So when Black Panther's gone, everything has gone awry, everything is broken apart. So nothing's working right. That's the way the story goes. So basically the villain inside of Ta-Nehisi Coates' run is now an internal threat. It's this person, his name is Tetu, and there's another woman, I forgot her name. Basically, they're the leaders of this insurrection inside of Wakanda, So it's like, how people say like Black supremacy or Black domination instead of white domination. White people create the Black domination, and then they blame you for the Black domination. That's what they did inside of Wakanda. It's an internal conflict. It's a colonized fiction. So the transformation of Wakanda, they introduced male domination to Wakanda. Then basically the assumption is Wakanda is in need of modernization or democratization. Like the West is the best people to tell people who should be democratic and not. Like I think of Bill Clinton. Like Bill Clinton gonna wave the American flag talking about this is what the Haitian people need in terms of being more democratic. And then what happens when President Aristide gets elected, democratically elected? The United States funds his enemies in all of the chaos inside of Haiti to oust him from his own government. They force him out and he basically has to flee Haiti for his own life. So basically, because he was democratically elected. Or if we want to look at Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, they fought a revolution against the Belgians in the United States for Patrice Lumumba to become the first president of an independent Congo, right? And then what do they call it? I don't want to get it backwards, but Zaire at the time. Either way, basically Eisenhower, the president Eisenhower gives the orders to get Patrice Lumumba assassinated by the CIA. So what do they do? They don't want democracy. They want control. That's what it is. They want to colonize and control the country and the government so that they can continue to extract the resources and steal from these countries and treat people however they want to treat them for their own benefit, under the name of democracy, waving the flag. So basically, Wakanda is transformed from an African civilization to a Black Western civilization. Progress. The revision of Black Panther. So this has implications, of course, for gender. Symbiotic complements. That's within the context of African culture. This is how men and women relate to each other. This is how we need to learn to relate to each other if we've been untaught that. you know? So symbiotic complements. You see the Dora Milaje fighting alongside Black Panther. This is a scene right before Black Panther finally gets revenge against the white man who killed his father, Claw. They fight alongside of him. But in Ta-Nehisi Coates' narrative, that's when the women, the Dora Milaje, they don't like some of the orders that they were given from not from Black Panther himself, from Black Panther's mother. They don't like one of the orders that they gave her. So they decide that Wakanda needs to be transformed, and no one man should have all that power, and no one should no one, this we need a revolution inside of Wakanda. So these feminist revolutionaries begin to fight the Black Panther. It's actually kind of crazy. So again, I'll just keep killing Panthers until none of you are left. That's Claw. And he's holding Black Panther's mother hostage. He's holding her hostage, and he's making his hand into a gun. He's shooting at both of them. He's shooting at men and women. He's shooting at them because he has their queen, right? And basically they're like, look, handle the fool, I'll take Claw. Like they're fighting multiple people. Like, they understand there's a war on all fronts, so they in action, And later, that's what I mean. No one man. That's they write it in burning, flaming letters, the way they do, whatever. And and basically they have a coup d'etat inside of a sovereign Wakanda. They shall pay. When they talking about they, who they mean? I mean, that's an important question for us to ask. Who's they? They talking about yourselves. You can't hate half of yourself and not hate yourself. Women are the other half of us. Men are the other half. So it's like, as Thomas Sankara said, he says, you can't have a revolution without women. He said, women hold up the other half of the sky. So again, they're not holding up half of the sky. They want to turn it all upside down in service of outside powers. So and back to Yai Santewa, this is back to the Ta-Nehisi Coates run, where they literally take the words of our ancestors and they try to change them into their narrative. And I was struck when I read this. I said, I know this quote. I was reading a comic book. I was like, I definitely know this quote. And that was actually kind of like the inspiration for how I started this whole project. And basically, so Yai Santewa, context to her, she was queen mother of the Ashanti. And what happened is the British were going to steal their golden stool. Let me see if I can show you the picture of the golden stool. Is it in that image? Yeah, so if you can see right behind Yai Santewa's head, the golden stool. That's a symbol of Ashanti sovereignty. The king sits on a stool. The queen sit on stools. That's a consistent theme within African history. If you look in all parts of African history, if you look at ancient Kush and Nubia, if you look at in Kemet, if you look in parts of the Niger-Congo region, if you look all throughout Africa, stools mean that they have that same rulership association. So the golden stool. So what happened is the British, let me get back to my slide. So the British went to go steal the golden stool from the Ashanti in order to basically break them, because they were putting up a fight. They were putting up like a war effort against the British colonizers who were coming to take over their land. So the way the British wanted to undermine their spirit, their resolve, is by taking away the golden stool. So that, taking away their symbol of sovereignty, because they understood their culture, they studied their culture, they understood the politics of it all, and the British used that to their advantage to undermine the sovereignty of those people. So when the stool was taken, it's almost like wow, like they've stolen our spirit, they've stolen our essence. So some of the men began to surrender. So Yai Santewa, one of the queen mothers, one of the leaders of the nation, she said, she basically says, no white man could have dared speak to a chief of the Ashanti in the way that Governor Frederick Mitchell Hodgson, she doesn't say his whole name, she says the governor, in the way the governor spoke to you this morning. Is it true the bravery of the Ashanti is no more? I cannot believe it. It cannot be. I must say this. If you, the men of the Ashanti, will not go forward, then we will. We, the women, will. I shall call upon my fellow women. So you see, like, when you look at the complete context of what drives these women in large numbers to go to war, I mean, you have individuals who, you know, maybe they're a little more like inclined than others, but that's on an individual way. If we're talking about on a large group of people, the impetus for what inspired all of these women to come to arms against the British was that the men wouldn't stand up for them. So, I mean, I'm thinking about Malcolm X's quote that's always misappropriated. The Black woman is the most disrespected woman. What is it? I wish I was reading it. What he say? He's like, the most disrespected person in American society is the Black woman. And what he's saying, if you listen to the context of the rest of that speech, is that's a call to arms for men to protect your women and to protect your children. He's saying these filthy crackers and racists and whoever, the Ku Klux Klan people, put their filthy hands out towards our women, and because we're scared, we don't protect them. That's his point. His point isn't oh, women are at the bottom and they're always going to be at the bottom. That's not his point. But when you take a sentiment like that and you put it within an ideological context, or you put it in a feminist context, it seems to purport the same kinds of sentiments that they already have. That's called it's called confirmation bias, you know? So what we need to do is learn to frame things inside of our own history and our own society and our own culture and our own collective before we decide to use one sentiment in isolation from the rest of its context, you know? So going back to the Black Panther thing, basically after Black Panther had left Wakanda, basically it's in disarray. So people are abusing their power inside of Wakanda in Ta-Nehisi Coates' narrative. The chieftain's outrage upon the girls of his village were known, yet lechery was unopposed. Basically, this guy, this Wakandan chief is basically gathering up women and children and doing complete atrocities directly to women and children. And there's no one to defend them. That's what they're saying. So basically, Anika, who's she's one of the more notable members of the Dora Milaje, she says Anika spoke to him as fathers and brothers should have spoke long before. And when she was not heeded, she did as the honor of Wakandan fathers and brothers have always demanded. Effectively, when I saw this, I said, they're not ignorant. They know the complete context. This is all about conscripting people into a feminist ideology. It's all about trying to give people a little bit of history. You know, when you give people a little bit of knowledge, but you don't give it all, or you don't give the complete context, this can be taken completely out of context. So what they did is they substitute Ya Asante while fighting against white men, the invaders, the outsiders, the external force, and they substitute that with the Black men or Black men. And they basically say, well, this one Black man is a reflect, you know, along with this chief and the leader of the villains and also Black Panther himself, you know, all of these men are the problem. The men are the problem, right? That's basically, you know, it's implied and it's there within the context of the larger narrative, right? So it becomes a colonized fiction instead of an anti-colonial fiction or yeah. And so this is one of my last slides, and then I'll start fielding questions. So basically, they turned the Dora Milaje into Wakandan Amazons based on the notion of being an Amazon, you know, based on, you know, white people, well, at least, you know, again, the first contact that the West or European powers really had with these women and Dahomey, you know, was conquest. They were trying to conquer them. So they named them something based on their history. And then they use that as the model. And then, you know, even as you're examining history and you're going about history, like people are still attached to the concept that initially originates within European history and culture because they've become uncritical. They've accepted the neutrality of the term Amazon. They've accepted the neutrality of their own, or they've pretended that they're neutral in their own analysis of the narrative, or that the narrative itself has a neutral capacity. But the implication for these kinds of narratives, when we inherit the baggage from European history, is internal conflicts between African men and African women within the context of white supremacy. It's still ongoing. The Ma'afa is not over. It's still happening. So what we need to do, I wish I had a slide a little bit more solution oriented. It's a problem. But what we need to do is recognize how people are trying to use these ideologies and how it fits into the direct politics, what's on the ground. You know, like theory is cool, but theory is just as important as what's going on, but you got to be able to see them together and application together. That's how we need to be able to use them. So I'm ending on a Bibi Fahode. That means Black Power in Twi. And this is the Adinkra symbol invented by Dr. Obadele Cambone for Black Power. And I'm fielding questions now. So thank you.
All right, brother Zach, round of applause. You just did your thing there. All right, family. So I'm going to moderate the Q&A very, very quickly. But before I do so, just a few quick reminders to everyone. First reminder is that if you haven't paid your membership dues for Q2 2020, please reach out to Sister Tahira as soon as possible and get your payment in. The second reminder is if you are joining us for the first time via Zoom or via YouTube and you're interested in becoming a member of AI Philly, we will post a link to our digital membership application both on YouTube and in the Zoom chat. So Sister Tahira, if you could post that link to our application, that would be very helpful. Those of you who are on YouTube, please do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And just the last reminder, AI Week 2020 starts, so we recognize AI Week every year annually from May 19th, which is Malcolm X Day, through May the 25th, which is African Liberation Day. It's a week full of events. This year, all of our events and presentations will be virtual. But for those of you who would like to attend, I will drop a link to today's newsletter that went out. And within the newsletter, as you can see right here, if you click on this link right here or this image in the newsletter, it will take you to the Eventbrite where you can register. So next weekend, there will be a forum on Saturday. I believe it starts at 1 o'clock. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But that's Saturday, the 23rd of May. That forum is the Anatomy of an African Renaissance Amidst a Global Shift. And the forum speakers will be Parat Amamazama, Dr. Malefi Asante, Dr. Obadele Cambone, and Dr. Bayina Bello. So that'll be on Saturday. And then following that on Sunday, we'll be having a fireside chat with Dr. Malefi Asante. The discussion will be centered around reimagining the movement towards a unified Africa. So I'll be moderating that discussion with Dr. Asante, but immediately following the discussion with Sesh, there will be a panel that will be held from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. where we will have a number of speakers from both the continent and the diaspora. We have a good gender balance. So I think we have about 4 sisters and we have 3 brothers speaking on the panel, 4 including me as the moderator. But it's going to be a heavy hitter. So please do tune in, subscribe, and register. And with that being said, I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to open it up for Q&A. So if anyone has a question Sister Wahida, if there are any questions on YouTube, can you copy and paste them into the Zoom chat? But if anyone within Zoom, if you guys have a question, what you can do is click the participants icon on the bottom of your screen. Once you click that icon, you will get some, I guess, a panel that allows you to raise your hand. If you select the raise your hand icon, I'll call on you. Okay, so Brother Tariq, first person. Brother Tariq, you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Okay, let me get ready. I'm ready.
What's up, man? So, I wanted to get your opinion on something. So when we talk about paradigm, that has to do with like values and our value system, what we celebrate. What do you think about like the celebration of the Dahomey people specifically when in the Dahomey Amazon warriors, when we know for a fact that they were a nation, an African nation that didn't have African people's collective interests in mind, and they were people who had foreign interests. So how does the celebration of Dahomey factor into a paradigm shift?
Well, I think it's all about historical context because if we look at the context under which the Dahomey as a nation decided to participate, well, I don't even want to say as a nation. I mean, some of them later, because the thing is, they had a very fierce history against the Oyo Empire or the Yoruba. So the thing is, it's like they didn't want to be under the tributary system of the Oyo. So basically, they wanted to be completely sovereign from the Oyo and their empire, and that's a conflict of national interest between African people. That's natural. That's going to happen when you organizing yourself. Like, I mean, I think all people are going to have conflicts, but I think external forces will work to exacerbate those conflicts. So when we look at the entire structure of the transatlantic slave system, it's a European slave trade. So the fact that these people participated within it, some people participated within it, it actually means we need to do a better job of contextualizing how their nation lost to the French and ultimately to the Portuguese. Because when we understand that context, we understand the kinds of pressures that are driving people into the behaviors that will make them participate into the slave trade. So even the Dahomey Amazons, or I don't like to call them the Amazons, I'm gonna call them the Mino because that's what they are. They're our mothers, our warrior mothers, right? I mean, there's other names that they've called these women too, but I'm gonna stick with that one because I think it's the most functional for right now. So when we look at the Mino of Dahomey, they did fight against they fought against the Yoruba while they were fighting against the French and while they were fighting other people. So when in the way African people thought about slavery, they didn't think about it in chattel slavery. So they saw it as those are captives from a competing nation or an enemy nation. They didn't see it as like, and maybe that speaks to Dr. Obadele Cambone's point about Black people needing to understand themselves as Black, like even back to antiquity, when we talk about Kemet, you know, when people come from outside to invade African nations, they pit African people against each other, African nations against each other, even in antiquity. So it's like, that's always the context, even now, then, or way back. That's always the context under which we need to understand ourselves as Black. And race first is so important because of that context. So I hope I answered your question. I mean, you can tell me if I did or I didn't. I mean,
No, that's good. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that particular subject. I know a lot of people when they talk about Dahomey, it's like a two-sided issue where they're like, well, we celebrate their achievements as a society and as a martial prowess. At the same time, you have people who say we shouldn't talk about the Dahomeys at all because if there were any slave societies in Africa, they were the one.
yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, it's easy to pick a nation where it's a large group of people participating in a large project. It's easy to do that, but also when it's so big like that, context is easily lost, and that's why I think it's so important. Our theoretical, our conceptual foundations, or the framework through which we approach history, because I come out of a history department, and they teach you to approach history as unbiased, and you can't be unbiased. Like, it's not real. I mean, the history teachers know that like they know that. They just are they that's why I said objectivity is a compulsory paradigm. It's what they teach you at every level of school. It's what they teach you in PhDs, in the graduate programs, especially in graduate programs. That's when you're dealing with theory the most. And then they teach you that when that's when they give you the content in undergrad and high school and middle school, and all the way down. That's the paradigm. The paradigm is to present this biased information, this Eurocentric information, as objective. So when they present the Dahomey as slave traders, they're saying objectively they sold trades. Objectively they sold slaves. They sold Black people. They sold other African people. Objectively, like they make it objective, but they don't want to give you the larger context, because the larger context would complicate their job in terms of controlling the way you understand your own history. So that's why Afrocentricity is so important. It enables us to understand our history within a context that makes sense, and not just makes sense, that is consistent with our political interests. That's the way history is written. People write history to advance their whatever their interest is. So if we look at C.L.R. James writing The Black Jacobins, he wrote that because it was supposed to be illuminating the Haitian Revolution, because he's looking at what's going on right now, like what's going on in the 30s. Like, what's going on in the 30s? It's like World War I, World War II. All these African people are trying to break away from all these European colonialists in the middle of World War I, World War II. So he wrote a history book about African history. He wrote a history book about the only or the most successful revolution of African people that he knew about. That's what I mean. Like, people write history intentionally. It's never an objective or a neutral project to write your history and reconstruct your own history. That's what we need to do. And we need context in order to do that. And context comes from an abundance of knowledge. Like, the bad things they did, the good things they did, the context in which they did it, the influences and why they did it, how the ideas are attached to the behaviors. I mean, because for me, I accepted the objective model, the objectivity thing as a history major, but as I'm reading the history, I'm starting to think, I'm like, well, I need to be unbiased, but I kind of agree with these people. I kind of agree with that person. But I kind of started to get to the point where I was like, okay, well, it's not that I just agree with this person in history. I'm starting to see that the historian either agrees or disagrees with this person. And I'm starting to see that the historians and people who are great and people who know how to use their own agency, they know their own history. They know how to use their history to exercise power for themselves, or to assert themselves, or to become good at whatever it is that they know how to do. I mean, if you want to be a good doctor, you got to know a little bit of history about medicine. If you want to be a good author, you need to know a little history about writing and how people came to write. Mathematicians know good history. And you know what? Mathematicians know theory. Doctors know theory. Everybody knows theory. So it's like the abstract is just as connected to the material as it is the other way around. And our ancestors knew that. I mean, it's embedded within their culture. I mean, that's what the meta nature is. I mean, we could talk about those kinds of things as well, but they understood that you can't separate those things. You can't alienate yourself from those things. You can't alienate yourself from history. You can't. It's impossible. Otherwise, you think you're a god. Like, that's what objectivity is. I think I'm a god. I mean, if we look at Hegel, that's what he said. He called his philosophy theology, because he thought that he was such a big brain and such a objective person, and he knew history so well that he was almost a god. The more knowledge he knew, he thought of himself as a god. I mean, I think we understand that we organize ourselves in relationship to divinity and in supreme creator and the sacred and all of that. We understand our relationship to that in a very natural way. It's embedded within our culture. It's who we are. But oftentimes, they're trying to teach you to alienate yourself from that. I'm not telling you to have a God complex like them. I'm telling you people make things sacred. But white people want you to think that their way is the only way to make things sacred. And it's not. And Afrocentricity is a science, or it's I don't want to call it a science. I don't want to do that. That's not what I'm doing. Well, what I want to say is it's a systematic way of producing knowledge for ourselves. Maybe sacred knowledge if we decide. I mean, I personally feel like everything has some kind of sacred essence. So it's the same kind of thing. I hope I didn't go too left, but yeah.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, thank you for your question, Brother Tariq. Brother Zach, the next question comes from YouTube. It comes from Brother Achille. He says, what's your opinion on the galactic empire of Wakanda Run?
Oh, I haven't read that, but to me, that doesn't make sense. Like galactic empire. I understand. I probably read it too. It's a comic book. I would go into. I wouldn't go into it uncritically. But to me, the very notion of galactic empire or world domination, and what is that? Churchill and Hitler and Napoleon and Alexander. There's no African people in their right mind that are thinking about world domination. I mean, they did it in the Black Panther movie. I remember, when Killmonger finally comes to power, he's like, the sun will never set on the Wakandan Empire. And I'm like, all right, Churchill, that doesn't even make sense. I mean, and Killmonger in the movie was talking about liberating people. So what oppressors do is they try to tell you that revolutionaries and liberators just want to be oppressors. So to me, it's that's what happens when white people or Marvel or some corporation attached to all of the other political interests of America and American imperialism, they understand the function of their propaganda. That's what happens when they want to take the black thing, quote unquote, the black thing or the African thing, and they want to make it universal. They want to make it like the European thing. But because it's black, or because we only see color and we don't see our own culture, then we accept that as this is ours too. We would do this too if we had power. We would do exactly what they do. And that's not the case, in my opinion.
So Brother Achille, he says, he asked if you can reserve judgment and read it. He wants to hear your feedback on it.
Oh yeah, I would definitely read it. And I feel like I'm kind of in presentation mode, so sorry, I'm definitely gonna go read it. I definitely plan to check it out.
I like the point that you raised though about oppressors try to spin the argument that revolutionaries and liberators are only fighting to be the new oppressors. Because you see that in feminist discourse quite often, that with the lines like, black men don't want to be black power, yeah. They just want to be like white men. And it's an argument that is pervasive within that frame of thinking, which I find very interesting. Does anyone else have any questions? You can, Brother Asar Imhotep wrote I don't know if this is a comment or a question.
Here,
he was commenting here. But Brother Asar, you can unmute your mic if you have a question. Or comment.
Maybe he's not there. Sorry. Anybody have other questions? We'll get back to him.
Brother Rich raised his hand. Brother Rich, you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Well, brother, I appreciate the you what you did, and I hadn't and I started with Black Panther, when it first came out, right? But I really didn't follow it. But when the movie came out, I got all the series. I got the what is that, the compilations to deal with the different writers. So I kind of went through all of that up to the Galactic. So I'm glad that you used Black Panther. I think that was a good way to go about it. In your talk, one thing that struck is two things, like when you mentioned about dealing with African history from antiquity, like not, the different phases of people taking on from 1619 or 1864 or 1492. Those periods that people can identify. I'm looking at cultural continuity and knowledge production, right? Because if I'm just the way I'm thinking, we may be doing things, looking at Harriet Tubman, that is coming out of ancient knowledge production, but we don't know it now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, we have to explore in order to really recodify, and I guess that's a question. Do we have to recodify in order to be really understand it, say as science, what we're doing, compared to let it just happen naturally, and people like Asada or Harriet or come to being and do things, but we're not knowing that there's African roots, not European roots, not Eurasian roots, but African roots. Is that a part of the quest as far as in the knowledge production that we're engaged in now, using Afrocentricity as the method to do that? If that makes sense.
I absolutely think that's at the core of the Afrocentric enterprise, I guess I can call it. Like, you gotta know, we have to begin with, who are we? Yeah. So, and I don't think it's coincidental. I was telling my friends this the other day. I don't think it's coincidental that Dr. Asante comes out of the field of communications and Dr. Mazama comes out of the field of linguistics. So when you talk about recodifying, I mean, that's exactly what they're trying to do with Afrocentricity. So we need terms and codes and logics and knowledge that will direct us towards an understanding of ourselves so that we can become actors right now, like, and players, as Dr. Asante says, not victims, but players, right? So that's what activates our agency. So yeah, I'm absolutely all for that. I mean, that was why I, in my original project, I didn't elaborate on Afrocentricity or objectivity. I did not do that, but I wanted to emphasize that because I want people to see that what you're seeing and what you understand is just a matter of perspective. And because it's a matter of perspective, it can be subject to influence. But it can also be an active agency to perceive and to observe and to create and to organize and to recodify, to use your words. I mean, that's Dr. Wilson's language too. It's like codes, keys, like that's what we need. So it's like people who are a lot smarter than me have already done that, So for me, I like to follow in their footsteps because I like the kinds of codes and terms that they use in order for us to organize our minds and our perspectives, and ultimately what we do. Like, what do you do? Well, you got to know what to do, but the only way you can know what to do is if you have an organized approach to it. So you got to organize your mind, you got to organize your terms. And I like, I brought up Afrikan womanism. She focuses on an aspect in the Afrocentric paradigm called Nomo. It's a term of West African origin. I think it's of the Dogon people. And it means the power of the word. And Clenora Hudson Weems focuses on Nomo when she talks about Africana womanism and why she doesn't want her social theory to be another version of feminism, right? She uses Africana womanism very deliberately because she's saying, with using their terms and their terminology, we don't have power over their terms. It's their ideology that they've developed from studying their own history, their own culture, their own problems, those kinds of things. So whenever we try to use their term or use a term from their history and culture in order to organize our behavior, there's going to be a clash. There's going to be a conceptual baggage that comes along with their term, you know? So it's like, how do we get around that? We need our own term, you know? And I like the way Dr. Weems, she's funny. I met her at NCBS. She was like, I remember she said, she was like, how you going to get on someone's bus and try to change the direction? She said, if I was them, I'd tell you to get your own bus. You know, like that's what Malcolm X said to, you know, the integrationists talking about integrating the buses. He's like, why don't y'all, you know, Claude Anderson, he talks about how his family had a whole network of buses. It was a Black-owned bus company in the 50s and 60s. They'd been doing it for however long. Nobody was talking about supporting the Black-owned bus company. They was talking about integrating the public buses that white people controlled, you know? So it was like, get your own bus. Like, yeah, we got our own bus. Like, you know? Any other questions?
Yes, sir. You have a, thank you so much for the question, Brother Rich. The next question comes from Brother Tristan. Tristan, you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
All right. What's up, everybody? And thanks for the presentation, Zach. Very solid. Question's actually, for once, very brief. Based on your discussion here, what is the importance of the African creative in liberation? Did you hear that clear? Because my connection is kind of weird.
Yeah, you said, what's the importance of the African creative? Like, so you're talking about like artists and people like, you know, like that, right? Am I mistaken?
You can't have a renaissance without artists.
Sure. But, you know, it's funny. Like, I remember being in class with Dr. Mazama, and we talked about this, and she was talking about how it strikes you how brilliant someone's work could be. And when you meet them, like, they can't articulate the significance or the power of their own work. You know, like, and sometimes their mind is in a completely different place than you would have thought it was, based on the power of the images that they have produced and created. And so there's so much brilliance that our people have in it, and it's structured so many different ways because everybody got their own different mind. So people are creative. So when I think of like creatives, I think the best way for us as people who are very structural in the way we think is produce environments for those people to exist in, because those people will respond to their environment and create based on their environment. And that's why I think separatism is so important, because the mere existence around white people makes you coddle them. It makes you comply with their ideas, their assumptions. You worry about being fired from your job. You worried about going to jail based on saying this. You worried about this. You remove all of that anxiety when you exist around your own people, when you organize around your own people, when you're saturated around your own people in your own culture. So to me, part of the Afrocentric project is creating spaces, separate spaces. We need to be militant about that separate aspect, because many people don't want to talk about that because the implications are you'll be perceived as a radical. Can you hear me? Okay, my phone. Whew, I gotta put my phone on charger in a minute. But
Yeah,
you
we
guys
hear
can
you.
still
We
hear
hear
me.
you.
My computer's up. You might not just be able to see my face, but whatever. But I was gonna say, like, people are afraid of being perceived as militant, but you know what? Why shouldn't we be militant advocates of ourselves? You know, create spaces for creatives and people who may not be as creative to share. Our people need to share spaces. I mean, Garvey was excellent at that. That's what he did. He took people from all different backgrounds. You know, like Tony Martin has a book called African Fundamentalism about Garvey and about all of the different kind of people that he allowed to write in the Negro world and to put on display. You know, like I think the woman, I think her name is Henrietta Vinton Davis. She was one of the people who was in charge of the UNIA. She was an actress. And she's also one of the people who whispered in Garvey's ear and got him to really start to make the black doll factories, right? So the thing is, it's like, that's what organization is. You get people who do different things and you get them in the same organization. So when people who are brilliant and it might be unrefined, you know, diamond in the rough, they might not have as much structure to the way they think. They might not be like a very political person, but they brilliant, you know, like I remember teaching kids. There's one kid, he couldn't read a lick. So the way his teacher decided to approach teaching him the science and biology books is he wouldn't have him write essays and little short answers. He'd have him draw what he saw in the textbook, you know? So those are the kinds of things that we need to be able to do, you know, in spaces that we control, especially in spaces we control, you know? And that's, yeah. So I hope I answered your question.
Hey, Tristan, that was a brilliant question. You know, so Wahida proposed an amazing forum that we're going to have next Saturday, which is the anatomy of an African Renaissance amidst a global shift. And I think, like, when you think about, you know, what a Renaissance entails in terms of, you know, your liberation, right? It entails art, literature, science, spirituality, culture, like all these things, like going back and capturing these things and reimagining them to take yourself and your people like into the future. So I'm really interested, and Zach, I hope you'll be joining us for that discussion next week. But does anyone else have any other questions? This has been a fantastic presentation.
You got one question in the chat. Scroll up, Afrothinka, Twitter account as well.
I can't see. Where is it?
He says, doesn't any
okay, yeah. Gotcha.
Doesn't any approach that fails to be aware and counterbalance a lack of objectivity play into confirmation bias and the inherent flaws that flow from unrestrained subjectivity and human imperfection?
I mean, when you say, I know what you're getting at when you say like unrestrained. Like, yeah, like I understand, like people need structures, they need restraint from overly personalizing issues. You can't just see beyond your own. Like some people can only see out their own face, you know, like, and you know, that is a problem. That absolutely is a problem. But the very notion of objectivity is alienation. The fact that you think you can alienate yourself from everything else. You think you can alienate yourself from influence. You think you can, like, and that's not true. The best thing we can do, if objectivity is something that we can never be, but we can't ever be objective, but we can be honest. That's the way Dr. Mazama puts it. Like, we can be honest, and that's why context is so important. So, like, I mean, yeah, so if people are unrestrained, that means they're unrestrained because they're just pontificating. They're saying their own opinion. But like, it's like, if this is your opinion based on facts and confirmation bias, like you said, you know, it's like, you're not being self-conscious. You know, you got to be self-conscious. You got to be restrained. So, I mean, I hope I answer your question head on. But objectivity operates more as a veil for a European perspective because no one's neutral. So when people claim to be objective, many times they inherit Eurocentric assumptions, and they operate based on Eurocentric assumptions or assumptions that were developed within European history and European culture. And we think we can take those assumptions or that epistemology, that way of thinking, we think we can take that from their history and culture and appropriate it into some different context. But when you appropriate it from a different context, that's imperialism. That's cultural imperialism. So so it's like, we want to be clear on where we're coming from and be honest about where we're coming from. And you know what? We don't got to be honest with everybody. We don't got to tell white people where we're coming from. I mean, in every conversation. But I mean, a lot of the time when you give enough facts and enough structure and enough information, you know what? People will say, well, I can't say he's lazy. Like, he's a hard worker. Wow, there's a lot of structure there. You know, and for people who are unwilling to acknowledge the amount of structure and the amount of refinement that we put into our work as scholars, I mean, not everybody does, but I mean, it happens at varying levels. It's like, that's what we need to be able to do. And we need to be able to recognize that. You know, we need to be able to appreciate people for the things that they do. So we can't be so caught up in being as many, this is a comment that many people make of Afrocentricity, of being pure about African culture, or pure about this or pure about that. We're not trying to be pure, but we're trying to be deliberate, and we understand our direction. So we're not trying to be pure. It's just, we don't see Africa as a box. It's not a box to be pure within. It's African people are dynamic. They create new things all the time. And I think that goes to Tristan's point about creativity, or his question rather about creativity. That's what creatives do. They create new things. So when we put ourselves in a box, or we say Africa is a box, or we say Africa is static, or we say it's not dynamic, then what we're doing is we're inheriting the assumption of objectivity that says you're being too subjective by coming, it's called epistemological centeredness. When you center yourself with Africa as a source of knowledge. When we say that, when we use Africa as a source of knowledge, we're putting ourselves in a box. That's not true. That's what white people would say, because they're trying to justify their own God complex. We're objective. You guys are not. Therefore, what you say is untrue in pseudoscience and pseudo this and pseudo history and da-da-da-da-da. You know, I see it all the time when I read about what these right-wing conservatives, I mean, not just right-wing, progressives, these black progressives, they levy the same kind of comments against Afrocentricity.
Zach, so Afrothinker says you're not really answering his question. He says that he's thinking more of the process of arguing both for and against the position, finding with equal force, so that in essence, only that which is true remains and stands.
I mean, what is true? Like, I mean, it's hard to say what's objectively true, because truth is defined by perspectives. So that's why it's like no matter how much you know. I mean, what's the Erykah Badu line in the song? The man who knows something knows he knows nothing at all. You can't know everything. But with objectivity, you think there's an endpoint where you can know everything. And that's why you're approaching it the way you're approaching it. Or not you. I'm not trying to personalize this, but I'm saying the objective person, the person who perceives themselves as objective, it's like you can study all sides of an issue. There's not one side, there's not truth and false. There's not what's true and what's false. Some things are false and some things are true, but context matters more than a fact, as Marimba Ani would say. You know, the way Europeans organize, the way they construct knowledge is they construct it as facts. They don't construct it with context. Context is what makes context is more powerful, because it gives the fact meaning. Meaning is more important than the fact, because I can look at it from his perspective, I can look at it from her perspective, I can look at it from that perspective, and we can all come to the same thing but it's all still about these different perspectives that I'm evaluating and running into each other and contrasting. So I hope I'm answering your question.
So you got a little bit of pushback from someone in the chat. This question comes from, not question, but comment comes from Asar Emotep. Brother Asar, if you want to unmute, because you can probably give more color to your statement than me just reading it.
I mean, I see the comment. I mean, he says the problem is you're trying to apply science to history, and history and sociology is not science. Yes, it is. I mean, every field of study is a science. That's what it is. A science is a systematic approach to producing knowledge. That's what it is. But people want to put science in one domain and look at how it's not related to others. You know, like, theory and theology are the same. I mean, they are. I mean, we can have a longer debate about this. I mean, I'm more than willing, but you know, like
we'll set that debate up for another time. That would be an interesting debate to have.
And I'm down.
I'm down for it.
You do, okay. All right. Well, we're gonna promise to the chat room right now that AI Philly will be continuing this discussion at a later date between Brother Asar Imhotep and Brother Zach.
Oh boy.
But just really quick, speaking of debates, last year during AI Week 2019, you and I had a debate on the best approach to education for liberation, and the question was the best approach: educating the masses or educating a critical mass. And listening to your presentation today, specifically dealing with the point related to entertainment, right, and how ideas are disseminated through entertainment, wouldn't you consider that a means of educating masses, or at least?
Yeah, sure.
All right, okay.
I mean, it's exposure.
Okay.
I mean, for many people, like,
I'm being petty.
All right.
I'm being petty. But no. In all seriousness, this was really a great presentation. Brother Tristan suggests that maybe during the next general membership meeting we can have a debate on objectivity. Is it African? So yeah, maybe that we're looking to carve out our schedule for the general membership meetings following AI Week, right? So for the summer and then going into the fall. So y'all should absolutely look forward to seeing this discussion on our calendar of events. It will definitely be coming out soon. Sister Wahida, did you have a question before I ask Brother Shanuti to close us out in prayer?
Yeah, I had a question. Brother Zach, I recalled just a little bit ago, Professor Bello, she was doing her series on Know Thyself, and she had Baba Smalls on there with her. And at one point, they were talking about, the origin story of Author and Offset, right? Which I'm sure you've heard of plenty of times. And they kind of put it in a different context where they were talking about Offset's role in how, her putting together the pieces of Author and sort of like, sort of the role of protecting and rejuvenating the life of Usher after that whole story. And I say that to say, do you think, like, what is your thought on the role of women in terms of protecting and continuing culture? Like, do you think that that needs to be reassessed and reevaluated the way we see that in order for us to do things like, for example, you mentioned Queen Amenorrenas, the way she pushed the Romans, or the Hyksos, we'll call it, outside of Africa, right, when they tried to progress. Are those the role of women in protecting and bringing us back to where we need to be is something that needs to be reimagined, or I think reassessed?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because when you said the thing about Aset putting Asar back together, Marimba Ani, that's what she was in one of her lectures. She was actually talking about how that's like her giving legitimacy to the power of Asar as the king. Like, so she kind of like, maybe I have it wrong, I gotta slow down a little bit because I do think that I do think that, like, the role, because I guess this is a habit of mine. I always come at it from the perspective of colonization. The way colonization or war works is what they do is they kill off the men or imprison the men or run off the men, and then they try to marry the women or rape the women in order to assimilate the next generations into domination. So if the women become assimilated, then they will assimilate the children. That's kind of like the colonizers' view. Like, that's their perspective, that's their strategy. So they need to split between the men and the women, because that's what we see with the prison industrial complex. That's what we see with in war. That's why you see an overabundance of young Black men getting shot in the street. There are Black women that get shot in the street, but it's an overabundance of Black men because the men are perceived primarily as the threat in a physical or combatant capacity. That's normally how they're perceived. and the women are seen, like you said, as the bearers of culture. So yeah, I mean, usually, I mean, linguists would say that too about like your mother tongue and all that kind of stuff. It's like mothers usually are the ones that raise children, or they're the ones that children tend to be closest to at the youngest stages of development, of child development. So when women are assimilated, a lot of the time the children become assimilated, men and women. I mean, I remember I was reading an article about Black nationalism, two strings of Black nationalism. That's what they called it, and they basically did kind of like a sociological study on which kinds of people or age groups and gender groups.
Josh Meyer's article?
No, not that one.
Okay.
I can send it to you. It's called the two attitudinal structures. I forgot what it's called. It's some scholar. I can share. I can share it. I have it. But basically what he says is like, it's like younger people and men tend to associate with separatism, the separatist strand of Black nationalism. And he talks about there being some kind of integrationist strand of Black nationalism. And he was saying that, you know, like the older people and predominantly, you know, like more women tend to associate with the integrationist strand. And basically, because if you think about it, being a radical, you become the target of repression. The more radical your politics are, the clearer your understanding is of whatever it is. And it's not to say that women don't have those understandings. They absolutely do. I tried to litter those women all throughout my presentation. But I think what it is like, in the short term, you just kill them. You know, you kill them off. But in the long term, you gotta assimilate people. You can't like, you know. So I hope I'm trying to give more context or whatever to the question. I hope I'm answering it.
Well, I guess the question is coming from like, if women wholesale believe that white male Eurasian construct that men are protectors and women are nurturers, that they've now left this thought process that they also are protectors as well. Like they've wholesale been sold on ideology. So now if you just take out the men, then everything falls apart, as if women can't do what Asatu has done, or women can't be the protectors of the culture and guide it forward, rather than having to assimilate and then train up the children into that assimilated ideology. So that's why I'm asking, what do you think about like the role of women in protection?
I mean, I can use my mind is going directly back to my presentation, but this is related. Based on the women of Dahomey, the warriors, some of them made it into the diaspora. One of those women was Toya Mantu. She raised John Jack Dessalines. So the thing is, Dessalines, he's the one who led Haiti to national independence. He's the one that created the sovereign African nation. But the reason he was able to understand and have that vision, and also his capacity to be a military fighter, is because of the woman who raised him. I mean, she definitely, I mean, I think they call her like Auntie Toya or Toya Manto. Like, I know her, I know the personality. I've read a little bit about it, but like, she's directly of these women. You see what I mean? The women that I was trying to talk about with the Dahomey Amazon, and that led to the leader of one of the most successful insurrections against white supremacy that we've seen. You know, so I would never underestimate the capacity of the role of mothers. There's no society without mothers, just like there's no society without fathers, in my opinion. Like, I mean, I'm not saying one is needed more, one is needed less. I'm just saying that maternal role can never be underestimated for its capacity and what it can do. And
I think, Zach, a good way to summarize it is just that the situation would be incomplete without one or the other. You have to have like that holistic, both have to be there, that balance. But we have one, Tristan, this is the final question, brother. This is Tristan's going to be our last question, and then Brother Jerome, if you would please just close us out in prayer.
Okay. So something you said that in your exchange, a dialogue with Sister Wahida, my question was kind of, how do you think, I guess I kind of want to get into the film itself, the Black Panther film. Did you think it was very feministy in the way that they portrayed the relationship between the Dora Milaje and the way they organized the military force? That's what I'll say. I'll ask that question and I'll let you kind of take it where you want to take it.
You know, I did not think that of the movie per se. Hold on, where's my phone? I didn't think that of the movie, but I can see how that could have been perceived. I mean, I used the image at the end of the movie from when they all got their spears and they're all pointed at the men and all the men are fighting them. I'm like, wait a minute, like how this split between Killmonger and Black Panther, how did it fall along gender lines? Like, to me, that was dumb. Like, I was like, what? I mean, now that you say it, yeah, I can kind of see it a little more. Like, I mean, yeah, I definitely can see that. I agree.
All right, thank you, Brother Zach, for a powerful and dynamic presentation. For those of you who are not subscribed to our listserv, Sister Wahida has dropped the link in the chat several times, but please do subscribe. It looks like Brother Asar and Brother Zach are very excited about this potential debate.
Can it be a conversation before it's a debate?
All right, well, you know, I think we're going to work to get something on the calendar for that. So definitely subscribe to our MailChimp, our listserv, so that you can be notified for our future events and presentations. Don't forget that AI Week 2020 starts on Malcolm X Day and ends on African Liberation Day. So we hope to see you all there. Brother Shanuti, you can unmute your mic and close us out in prayer.
Thank you, Asante Sana. Again, I want to ask permission to the elder to allow me to do this prayer. So I want to thank the ancestors for this wonderful meeting, to continue to inspire us and to continue to give us courage during this difficult time, to not allow us to lose sight of the very important things that we are doing here. And I want to ask them to continue to protect our organization and in your organization alongside with us who are working for the liberation of African people in the continent and abroad. And I also want to continue to ask them to protect our health, provide us food and abundance of opportunity. Unity is our aim, victory is our destiny. Ashe.
Ashe.
Back to you, Wally.
All right, thank you,
All
everybody.
right, peace.
Peace, everyone.
Peace.
Peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach. You did a great job.